Hello from SwissWatchExpo. Most of us are familiar with the phrase, shoot for the moon, and if you miss, you'll land among the stars. And with graduation right around the corner, we couldn't be more in tune with setting our dreams really high for our future. So today we're going to be talking about watches that have that same iconic level of going to the moon. In fact, the Speedmaster Professional, known as the MoonWatch. Like I said before, today we're going to be speaking about the Omega Speedmaster Professional, the MoonWatch. This is going to be the series of watches that were actually worn on the moon and their successors, right? So we've got a couple of different variations of the MoonWatch as they've come out through the years, the decades rather. And over here on what would be your far left is going to be a 321, which is the movement, not actually the reference number of the watch itself, but today we're going to be talking about the different movements that power the different versions of the MoonWatch. So over here we've got the caliber 321. This is going to be the original caliber that was used in the first Speedmaster models, dating back from 1957 all the way up until about 1968 when it was replaced with a later movement that we'll get to. But this is actually going to be the watch that was worn on the moon by Buzz Aldrin. Neil Armstrong had one as well. He did not actually, I don't believe he took his onto the surface of the moon, but it was there. They did go into space. They are very somewhat elaborate movements that use a column wheel, and servicing them can be quite hindersome. Not only because there were so few of them produced relative to the very large number of Speedmaster Professionals that have come out since the 50s, but these are going to be watches that not only have a difficult time sourcing the parts, but the labor on them is much more extensive. So servicing these watches can come at a cost, but for the truest, the person that is pure and really wants to identify with the culture and the history of the watch, the 321 is the only way to go. Now, as I said, in 1968, 1969 timeframe, they relaunched it and they came out with the 861 to replace the 321. Now, what they changed inside this movement was they removed the column wheel and replaced it with a cam. So it's a cam-controlled movement. And the reason that they did that, again, was to help create like a product that could be produced on a more massive scale to reach more people. There was a lot of talk about the MoonWatch after it became the MoonWatch, after going to the moon. So a lot of people wanted to get in on this part of history. But creating the 321 was only able to be done in relatively small numbers. The service was extensive. And so they redesigned it and made some tweaks that made it a little bit easier to service, a little bit easier to produce the movements, which cuts down on your cost, the residual cost of owning one of these watches. Now, aside from changing that column wheel to the cam-controlled movement, they did increase the beat rate from 18,000 vibrations per hour on the 321 to 21,600, which operates at 3 hertz is going to be the reading that will come from that. Now, this one, like I said, came out like 1969. It was in production for the longest period of time until Omega relaunched it again, this time adding a single digit of 1 to the beginning of the movement. Now we're going to be talking about the 1861. This is a movement that was released in the late 90s. And it was the successor to the 861. It's very, very similar, but they replaced some of the copper or bare metal parts inside the watch with rhodium plated that, increase some. It just makes it for a prettier watch. It's easier to produce the parts. And again, once again, it is easier to service. So cutting down on your residual cost of owning one of these and keeping it in your collection, even passing them down for future generations. So all very, very, relevant elements that you would want to consider when choosing which MoonWatch you want to go with. They did make another change when they went from the 861 to the 1861, and that was the removal of tritium, right, which is a radioactive element that fades away over time due to the natural, the half-life phenomenon of radioactive materials. So that was replaced with a photoluminescent, a luminova, superluminova, where you can actually charge it with light to get that glow-in-the-dark property. Plus, it's a lot healthier for the watchmakers who would be dealing with those materials. Tritium is not something that the wearer of the watch would need to be concerned with, poisoning their body. But for anybody using a paintbrush that's actually dealing with the material, it was quite hindersome and damaging to their health. Now, I did say we've got 4 here, and this last one has a very similar movement to the 1861, but it's actually an 1863. And the difference is going to be found in the fact that this has an exhibition caseback. This is very common in the world of horology, where they will put a sapphire crystal on the case back, allowing a viewer or wearer to look into the movement and actually see what is going on. So it's the same movement as the 1861, but it's got the exhibition case back, and they actually made it a little bit more ornate, right? So they've replaced some of the parts with just fancier looking parts that are more attractive to the eye, more appealing. They've taken a great step in detail, very fine detail, on a bunch of parts on the bridges and other elements of the watch that when you really start to look at it, it's quite captivating. It's something that you can stare into for quite some time without ever really getting bored, because there's just so much going on in these watches. Now, kind of talking about all of them as a whole, they're all going to be 42 millimeter case size. It's very a signature feature of the MoonWatch or the Speedmaster Professional. They're also all going to be manual winding movements. You can get Speedmasters with automatic movements, but to be within the professional line, to have a MoonWatch, one of the watches that either went to the moon or a descendant of those, it's going to be a manual wind movement. Now, you're welcome to choose whichever one you want. Again, the truest or the purest is going to be leaning towards the 321, but the cost of owning one, of pursuing it as a collector's item that you want to maintain over time, something to be aware of. It is going to be that more desirable by collectors, but it does come with a couple of cons, just simply because there aren't as many parts for them. Come check them out at SwissWatchExpo. Like the bell, subscribe, and if you have any questions about the MoonWatch or any other watch that we may come across, please reach out to us. We'd love to answer your questions. We'd love to get your suggestions, and we can do some more videos in the future that kind of help supplement any of the information that you're looking for. Thanks for watching.